A single mother watches in fear as her newborn struggles to breathe, while the family dog refuses to leave her side, lying protectively through every terrifying episode. At first, the hospital sees it as just a comforting gesture. But something about the dog's behavior is far from ordinary. As tests reveal strange patterns and strange chemicals turn up in the baby's blood, a shocking truth begins to emerge. Someone close may not have the baby's best interests at heart, and the dog might be the only one who can silently protect her. Secrets, danger, and betrayal collide in ways no one expects. How far will a mother go to protect her child? And could a dog hold the key to saving her life? The fluorescent lights of County General's emergency room buzzed overhead as Marlo Quinn paced the worn linoleum floor, her arms tightly cradling 3-month-old Wren. The baby's breathing came in short, labored gasps that made Marlo's own chest tighten with fear. Each raspy inhale sent ripples of panic through her body, making her heart pound against her ribs like a trapped animal. "Shh, sweetie, Mommy's here," she whispered, pressing her lips to Wren's burning forehead. 4 days of fever had left dark circles under her daughter's eyes, and Marlo couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The heat radiating from Wren's tiny body seemed to intensify with each passing hour, her once plump cheeks now sunken and flushed an alarming shade of crimson. At her feet, Bear, their golden-brown shelter dog, hadn't moved from his protective position. His muscular body pressed against her legs whenever she stopped moving, his eyes fixed on the tiny bundle in her arms. The large dog's presence drew curious stares from other patients in the waiting room, but Marlo couldn't bring herself to care. Bear's warm weight against her calves was the only steady thing in her world right now, his unwavering vigilance a silent confirmation of her deepest fears. A toddler across the room pointed at Bear, but his mother quickly hushed him. An elderly man with an oxygen tank shook his head disapprovingly. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across the crowded space, highlighting the exhaustion etched into every face. "Mrs. Quinn?" A tired-looking doctor appeared with a clipboard, his white coat wrinkled from what was clearly a long shift. Dark stubble peppered his jawline, and his eyes were bloodshot behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Your daughter's tests show a typical viral infection, with rest and fluids—" "No," Marlo cut in, her voice trembling. "This isn't normal. She's barely breathing. Bear won't leave her side. He knows something's wrong." Her fingers tightened around Wren's blanket, knuckles whitening with desperation. The doctor's expression softened with practiced patience, the kind reserved for overwrought parents. "I understand you're worried, but bringing your dog into the ER isn't—" "He's the reason I brought her in tonight," Marlo insisted, her throat tight with unshed tears. "He started whining and nudging her right before her breathing got worse. He's never done that before. Something is seriously wrong with my baby." The words tumbled out, urgent and pleading. A nurse nearby looked up from her station, her attention caught by the exchange. She watched as Bear suddenly stood at attention, his ears forward and body tense. His nails clicked against the linoleum as he shifted position, muscles coiling beneath his golden-brown coat. Seconds later, Wren's tiny body went rigid. Her lips began turning blue, the color draining from her face like water down a drain. "Help!" Marlo screamed, her legs giving out beneath her. The clipboard in the doctor's hands clattered to the floor as Bear's large frame steadied her, his solid body preventing her from collapsing completely as she sank to her knees, still clutching Wren. The cold linoleum pressed against her jeans, the hospital's antiseptic smell suddenly overpowering. The nurse sprinted over, her shoes squeaking against the floor. Her experienced eyes quickly took in the situation, from Wren's blue-tinged lips to Marlo's terror-stricken face. "Code Blue! I need a team in here now!" Her voice rang out across the waiting room, cutting through the ambient noise like a siren. Everything became a blur of motion. The doctor who had dismissed them moments before rushed forward with several others, medical jargon flying between them. But before they could reach Wren, Bear positioned himself between the approaching medical team and the baby, his body forming a protective barrier. A low growl rumbled in his chest, his hackles rising slightly as he stood guard over the vulnerable pair. "Bear, let them help," Marlowe choked out through sobs that racked her small frame. The dog immediately shifted, allowing the medical team access while maintaining close contact with Wren. His intelligent eyes never left the baby, even as hands reached to take her from Marlowe's trembling arms. The nurse who had first responded, her nameplate read, Sandra, knelt beside them, her green scrubs rustling. Crow's feet crinkled around her eyes as she studied Bear with unusual interest. "How long has the dog been acting this way?" "Days," Marlowe said, tears streaming down her face as she watched the team work on her daughter. Salt stung her chapped lips as she spoke. "He won't leave her. It's like he knows. He's been sleeping under her crib, whining whenever I put her down." Sandra nodded, her eyes sharp with interest. "Animals sometimes sense things we can't. Has anyone done a full cardiac workup?" "They said it was just a virus," Marlowe whispered, her voice breaking. Her fingers twisted anxiously in the fabric of her shirt, seeking something to hold on to as her world tilted sideways. Bear whined softly, pressing his nose against Wren's tiny foot as the medical team stabilized her breathing. His eyes never left the baby's face, his tail still, against the floor as he maintained his silent vigil. "I want a complete panel," Sandra ordered, taking charge of the situation. Her voice carried the weight of authority despite her small stature. "And get pediatric cardiology down here, now. I want an EKG and echocardiogram stat." The doctor who had dismissed them earlier started to object, clipboard now back in hand, but Sandra cut him off with a look that could have frozen boiling water. "That dog's behavior isn't normal, and neither is this baby's distress. We need to rule everything out." Marlowe watched as they wheeled Wren away on a gurney far too large for her tiny body, Bear walking steadily alongside until they reached the double doors where he couldn't follow. His claws clicked against the floor as he reluctantly returned to Marlowe's side, leaning heavily against her as she collapsed into a chair, its vinyl upholstery cracked and worn from countless worried families before her. "Thank you," she said to Sandra, who had stayed behind, her hand resting on Marlowe's shoulder. "For listening, for seeing what I saw." Her words came out in hiccuping gasps between silent sobs. "Sometimes we need to pay attention to signs that aren't in the medical textbooks," Sandra replied, watching Bear's unwavering focus on the doors where Wren had disappeared. Her voice softened with a wisdom born of years in emergency medicine. "Your dog might have just saved your daughter's life." Marlowe buried her face in Bear's fur, her tears dampening his coat. The familiar smell of him, part sunshine, part the lavender detergent she used on his bed, brought a momentary comfort. He turned his head to nuzzle her, his warm breath against her tear-stained cheek, but his eyes remained fixed on those double doors, standing guard even from a distance. The weight of his body against her legs was the only thing keeping her grounded as they waited for news about Wren. The buzz of the fluorescent lights continued overhead, but now it was joined by the steady stream of medical personnel moving with new urgency through the department. A cleaning cart squeaked past, and the night security guard paused to look at Bear with curious admiration. Bear's warning had finally been heard, and Marlowe prayed with every fiber of her being that it hadn't come too late. The hours crawled by in the emergency room as Marlowe paced the worn linoleum floors, her shoes making soft, scuffing noises with each anxious step. Bear matched her movements precisely, his nails clicking softly against the tiles like a metronome counting down their shared worry. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across his golden-brown coat, highlighting the ripple of muscles beneath his fur as he moved. Every few minutes, his head would snap toward Wren's bed, with an alertness that was almost uncanny, causing Marlowe's heart to skip and her breath to catch in her throat. "Mrs. Quinn," Dr. Stevens approached, his white coat pristine despite the late hour, not a wrinkle visible even after what must have been a 12-hour shift. His clinical detachment seemed to create an invisible barrier between them. "We've run preliminary tests, but they're not showing anything unusual in your daughter's condition. Perhaps it would be best if you took your companion animal home to rest. The hospital environment can be stressful for pets." Marlowe's fingers tightened in Bear's fur, finding comfort in his solid warmth. She could feel her nails digging into her palm with her other hand, fighting to maintain composure. "He's not a comfort animal or a pet. He's warning us when something's wrong with Wren. He knows before your machines do." "I understand you're stressed," Dr. Stevens said with practiced patience that felt more like condescension. His eyes briefly flicked to his watch. "Any parent would be. But we can't base medical decisions on a dog's behavior. We need empirical evidence, not animal instincts." A nurse working nearby at the monitoring station looked up, his warm brown eyes taking in the scene. He'd been watching them throughout his shift, quietly observing how Bear's attention never wavered from the baby. He'd noticed the pattern that the doctor was too busy to see. "Doctor?" the nurse spoke up, setting down his clipboard and stepping forward. "I've seen this dog react seconds before each monitoring alert tonight. 3 separate incidents. Maybe we should consider—" "Thank you, Nurse Aguilar." Dr. Stevens cut him off with barely concealed irritation, straightening his glasses. "But we'll stick to medical protocols and evidence-based practice, not anecdotal observations about pets." As the doctor walked away, his shoes squeaking slightly against the floor, Nurse Aguilar approached Marlowe. His scrubs were wrinkled from a long shift, but his eyes remained alert and kind. "I'm Thomas," he said quietly, offering his hand. "And I believe you about your dog. I've been watching him all night." Marlowe's eyes filled with tears, the simple validation breaking through her carefully constructed composure. A single tear tracked down her cheek. "You do? No one else will even consider it. I've worked here 15 years, seen all kinds of things, but never anything like this." He glanced at Bear, who was now standing alert, ears perked forward, staring intently at Wren's small form beneath the hospital blankets. "How long has he been doing this? Was he specially trained?" Before Marlowe could answer, Bear let out a low whine that seemed to vibrate through the air. His paws shifted restlessly on the floor, body tensing. The monitors hadn't changed yet, their steady beeping unchanged, but Marlowe rushed to Wren's side, recognizing the warning. Thomas followed immediately, his movements efficient as he checked the baby's vitals. "Her oxygen's dropping," he said, already moving to adjust her support, fingers flying across the equipment with practiced ease. "It's subtle. The monitors haven't triggered the alarm yet." But Bear knew before the machines did. That's remarkable. Marlowe watched as her daughter's tiny chest struggled to rise and fall, the slight blue tinge around her lips sending terror through her veins. She reached out to stroke Wren's wispy hair. "Why won't they listen to me? Something's really wrong with her, and they're acting like I'm just being hysterical." "Hospital bureaucracy," Thomas said, shaking his head as he adjusted Wren's oxygen levels. "They want everything in neat little boxes with corresponding billing codes. A dog predicting medical emergencies doesn't fit their paperwork or their medical textbooks. But I've been a nurse long enough to know medicine isn't always textbook." Bear pressed against Marlowe's legs as Thomas stabilized Wren, the dog's warm body a solid anchor. His presence was grounding her when everything else felt like it was spinning out of control. Marlowe could feel his steady heartbeat against her calf, a reminder to keep breathing. "Look," Thomas said, lowering his voice and leaning closer, the scent of hospital antiseptic and coffee on his breath. "I'll help document every incident, every time Bear alerts before the monitors. We'll build a case they can't ignore. Sometimes you need evidence they understand before they'll listen." "Why would you do that for us?" Marlowe asked, exhaustion evident in her voice and the dark circles beneath her eyes. She tucked a strand of auburn hair behind her ear with trembling fingers. "You don't even know us." "Because sometimes the system needs a push to do the right thing." He smiled slightly, crow's feet crinkling at the corners of his eyes. "And because in 15 years of nursing, I've learned to trust what I see with my own eyes, not just what the textbooks say. That dog of yours has a gift. If it helps your daughter, I'm on board." A hospital administrator in a tailored suit stopped by later, clipboard in hand, lips pursed in disapproval as she eyed Bear sitting vigilantly by Wren's bed. "Mrs. Quinn? I understand your daughter's situation is concerning, but we have policies about animals in the hospital," she explained, her voice clipped and formal. "Perhaps it would be best if—" "No," Marlowe said firmly, surprising herself with the strength in her voice as she stood up straight. "Bear stays. He's keeping my daughter alive. I won't negotiate on this." The administrator's eyebrows rose slightly. "Mrs. Quinn, while we appreciate your attachment to your pet—" "He's not just a pet," Marlowe interrupted, stepping forward, her exhaustion temporarily burned away by maternal determination. "He's warned us about every episode before it happened. Ask Nurse Aguilar. He's been witnessing it all night. Bear detects changes before your expensive equipment does." The administrator's lips thinned into a tight line, her fingers tightening on her clipboard. "We'll need to discuss this with the ethics committee. This is highly irregular." After she left, her heels clicking a faux, sharp retreat, Thomas appeared with a cup of coffee for Marlowe, the steam rising with the scent of hospital cafeteria blend. "You're doing the right thing," he said, his voice soft but certain. "Standing your ground. Not many would have the courage." "I'm so tired," Marlowe admitted, accepting the coffee with trembling hands, the warmth seeping into her cold fingers. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her shoulders slumped with the weight of constant vigilance. "Sometimes I feel like I'm going to collapse, but I can't give up. Wren needs me to fight for her. She has no one else." "You're not fighting alone anymore," Thomas assured her, his presence steady beside her. He pulled out a small notebook from his scrubs pocket, flipping it open to reveal neat, precise handwriting. "I've been keeping track. 3 times now Bear has alerted us before any changes showed on the monitors. That's not coincidence. That's a pattern we can use." Bear's head suddenly lifted from where he'd been resting, his body tensing and ears swiveling forward. A low rumble vibrated in his chest, barely audible but unmistakable to Marlowe, who had come to dread that sound. She watched with renewed fear as he stared intently at Wren, his posture rigid with alert concern. "See?" Thomas said, already moving to check the baby, his experienced hands gentle but efficient. "He knows. Something's changing that we can't see yet. Let's document this one too. Time, behavior, and what we find. They can't ignore the evidence forever. Science is about observation, and this is observable." Marlowe stood straighter, drawing strength from Bear's steady presence against her leg and Thomas's quiet, competent support. The fluorescent lights no longer seemed quite so harsh, the hospital sounds no longer so overwhelming. She wasn't just a worried mother anymore. She was her daughter's advocate, armed with allies and evidence, and she would make them understand, no matter what it took. For Wren's sake, she would stand against the entire medical establishment if necessary. The click of expensive heels echoed through the hospital corridor, drawing every eye. Evelyn Caldwell strode in like she owned the building, which, given her real estate empire, she might have. Her silver blonde hair was perfectly styled despite the late hour. Her designer suit unwrinkled, the fabric catching the harsh fluorescent lights with a subtle sheen that seemed to announce her wealth without a single word spoken. "Where is my granddaughter?" Her voice cut through the quiet buzz of hospital activity, sharp and commanding, causing nurses to pause mid-stride and patients to shrink back against walls. Marlowe's blood ran cold, a chill spreading from her core to her fingertips. She hadn't seen Evelyn since before Wren was born, when she'd tried to bribe Marlowe to disappear during her pregnancy. A memory that still woke her in cold sweats some nights, the casual cruelty of the check sliding across the table, the amount more money than Marlowe had ever seen in her life. Bear's fur bristled as he positioned himself between Marlowe and the approaching woman, his muscular body tensing, a low rumble beginning deep in his chest. Even he could sense the threat, his golden brown coat standing on end as his protective instincts kicked into high gear. "Mrs. Caldwell?" The hospital administrator who'd been giving them trouble about Bear practically ran to greet her, smoothing her lab coat and extending a hand that trembled slightly. "We weren't expecting you. Clearly not. Or my granddaughter would be receiving proper care instead of relying on a mongrel for medical attention." Evelyn's lip curled as she looked at Bear, her eyes cold with disdain. She didn't bother to take the administrator's offered hand, instead adjusting the expensive watch on her wrist. "I don't know what kind of establishment you're running here, but this is entirely unacceptable." Thomas stepped closer to Marlowe, his presence supportive, his shoulder brushing against hers in silent solidarity. The warmth of him was a stark contrast to the ice Evelyn brought into the room. "Your granddaughter is receiving excellent care," he said firmly, his voice carrying the authority of his years of medical experience. Evelyn ignored him completely, as if he were merely furniture, focusing her laser-like attention on the administrator. "I want to see Dr. Stevens immediately, and get that dog out of here. It's a liability issue waiting to happen. I can only imagine what the board would say about allowing animals to roam your pediatric ward." "You have no right," Marlowe found her voice, surprised at how steady it sounded, despite the earthquake happening inside her chest. "You're not Wren's guardian. You can't make decisions about her care. You lost that privilege when you tried to pay me to abort my pregnancy." Several staff members within earshot looked up sharply at this revelation. "Oh, darling," Evelyn's smile was sharp as glass, her perfect teeth gleaming. "I have every right. I've already spoken with my lawyers. They're very concerned about an unstable mother who's insisting a shelter dog is providing medical care. Not to mention your creative interpretation of our past interactions." The administrator shifted uncomfortably, gaze darting between the powerful woman and the exhausted mother. "Mrs. Quinn, perhaps it would be best if—" "No," Marlowe said, her voice stronger than she felt, drawing herself up to her full height, though she still stood inches shorter than her adversary. "Wren is my daughter. Bear has been keeping her safe. I won't let you ignore that. I won't let you sweep in after years of absence and pretend you have her best interests at heart." "Keeping her safe?" Evelyn laughed coldly, the sound like icicles shattering. "By what medical standard? Which peer-reviewed journal published the findings on canine diagnostics? This is exactly what I mean about instability. My lawyers, I swore. We'll have emergency custody papers by morning. I've already made arrangements at the country house for a nursery." Bear growled low in his throat, the sound vibrating through the room, causing Evelyn to step back slightly, her hand clutching her designer purse tighter. "See? That animal is dangerous." She turned to the administrator, her voice rising to ensure everyone nearby could hear. "I want it removed immediately, and I expect my granddaughter to be transferred to private care as soon as possible. I've already made a substantial donation to the hospital foundation to expedite matters." The administrator nodded quickly, clearly intimidated. "We'll make arrangements." "You'll do no such thing," Thomas interrupted, stepping forward, his warm brown eyes flashing with indignation. "I've been documenting Bear's alerts all night. They're real, and they're saving this baby's life. Remove him, and you're putting her at risk. I'm willing to testify to that effect in any court." "A nurse's opinion hardly outweighs proper medical authority," Evelyn said dismissively, waving a bejeweled hand in the air. "I've already arranged for the finest pediatric team at Boston Memorial. Dr. Harrington, perhaps you've heard of him? He's written 3 textbooks on pediatric care, is standing by." Marlowe felt the walls closing in, the fluorescent lights suddenly too bright, the antiseptic smell overwhelming. Everything was happening too fast, spinning beyond her control. "You can't just take her," she said, hating how her voice shook, betraying her fear. "She's my baby. You've never even held her." "Watch me," Evelyn said softly, leaning closer so only Marlowe could hear. "You're barely making ends meet, living in that tiny apartment, working 2 jobs. What judge would choose that over a stable home with every advantage?" "I have photos, Marlowe. Your apartment, your second-hand furniture, that rusted car you drive. I've been preparing for this since the day you refused my offer." "Love," Marlowe said firmly, refusing to back down despite the trembling in her knees. "A judge would choose love and safety. Bear has saved Wren's life multiple times tonight alone. While you were, attending a charity gala? Renovating your summer home?" Evelyn's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Security," she called out, her voice carrying across the ward. "I want this dog removed, immediately." 2 security guards approached uncertainly, exchanging glances. Bear stood his ground, not aggressive but absolutely immovable, his body a golden wall between the threat and his family. "Mrs. Quinn," one guard said apologetically, cap in hand, "we need you to—" Bear's head suddenly snapped toward Wren's bed, his muscles tensing, ears forward. His warning whine cut through the tension, high-pitched and urgent, his entire focus shifting away from the confrontation. "Check her stats," Thomas ordered, already moving toward the monitors, his nurse's instincts taking over. "Now." The monitors hadn't changed yet, but everyone watched as Wren's tiny body seemed to tense, her breathing becoming labored, small chest working harder. Within seconds, alarms started blaring, the harsh electronic sound confirming what Bear had already known. "Get a doctor in here," Thomas called out, working quickly to stabilize the baby, his hands sure and steady despite the chaos around them. "Her oxygen's dropping. We need respiratory support." Evelyn stepped back, her perfectly composed facade cracking slightly as she watched the medical team rush in, the urgency of their movements belying the seriousness of the situation. Bear stayed focused on Wren, ignoring everything else, his eyes never leaving the infant even as doctors crowded around. "You see," Marlowe's voice was quiet but intense as she stepped closer to her former mother-in-law. "This is what you'd be taking her from. Bear knows before anyone else when she's in trouble. Before the machines, before the doctors. He's not just a dog, he's her guardian angel. And you would separate them because of your pride." The administrator looked torn between Evelyn's influence and the undeniable evidence before her, watching as the medical team stabilized Wren following Bear's warning. "Perhaps we should wait before making any decisions about transfers. This seems like an unusual case that requires further consideration." "This isn't over," Evelyn said, her voice tight with anger, a vein pulsing at her temple, betraying the fury beneath her polished exterior. "My lawyers will be in touch, and they won't be impressed by parlor tricks with a trained mutt. Don't get comfortable, Marlowe. Money talks in this world, and you're tragically short on conversation. She turned on her heel and strode away, the click-clack of her expensive shoes fading down the corridor, leaving behind the scent of expensive perfume and the weight of her threats hanging in the air like a storm cloud. Marlowe watched her go, one hand on Bear's head, drawing strength from his unwavering presence as the medical team continued working to save her daughter's life. After Evelyn's dramatic exit, Marlowe slumped against the wall, exhausted. The confrontation had drained what little energy she had left, leaving her limbs feeling leaden and her mind foggy. Bear returned to his vigilant position by Wren's bed once the medical team stabilized her, his powerful body settling into the familiar protective stance, eyes never leaving the small figure beneath the tangle of tubes and wires. "We need to move fast," Thomas said, checking Wren's vitals again with practiced efficiency. His fingers moved quickly over the equipment, his brow furrowed with concentration. "That woman's not going to wait long before making good on her threats. Someone like her, with those connections, she'll have lawyers working through the night." Marlowe nodded, running her fingers through her tangled hair, wincing as they caught in the knots formed from hours of anxious hospital vigilance. "But how? They keep dismissing Bear's warnings as coincidence. The attending physician practically laughed me out of the room this morning." "Then we document everything." Thomas pulled out his phone with determined precision. "I've been recording timestamps of Bear's alerts compared to Wren's episodes. See?" He showed Marlowe the detailed notes in his phone. "We need more evidence, though. Something concrete that they can't dismiss with a wave of their hand or medical jargon." "Dr. Chen," Marlowe remembered suddenly, sitting upright as a spark of hope flared. "The pulmonologist who saw her yesterday. She seemed less dismissive than the others. When Bear alerted, she actually paused to watch instead of ignoring him." "Good thinking." Thomas made a quick call to the nurses' station, his voice taking on the authoritative tone he reserved for professional matters. "She's still on rotation. I'll page her. If anyone will listen with an open mind, it might be her." While they waited, Marlowe pulled out her phone with trembling fingers and called the shelter where she'd adopted Bear. The phone rang 3 times before a familiar voice answered. "Sarah, it's Marlowe Quinn. Remember how Bear always seemed protective of sick animals in the shelter? How he would sit outside their kennels before even you knew something was wrong? I need your help proving he can detect medical issues. It's about Wren. We're at Memorial Hospital." 20 minutes later, Dr. Chen arrived, looking tired but interested. Her white coat was slightly rumpled, dark circles beneath her eyes suggesting she'd been on shift for many hours, but her gaze was sharp and attentive. "Nurse Aguilar said there's been another episode, and something about the dog detecting it beforehand?" "Yes, and Bear warned us again," Marlowe explained, gesturing to the golden-brown dog who hadn't budged from his position. "He's done it every time. Please, can you help us understand what's happening? Everyone else thinks I'm just a hysterical mother seeing patterns where there aren't any." Dr. Chen studied Bear thoughtfully, her analytical gaze taking in his alert posture and focused attention. "I've read about dogs detecting seizures and certain cancers. Some can smell changes in blood chemistry before medical equipment registers them. It's not completely unprecedented." She turned to Thomas, professional curiosity clearly piqued. "You've been tracking the alerts?" "Everyone," he confirmed, showing her his notes on his phone, scrolling through the meticulous records. "The pattern is clear. Bear warns us an average of 45 seconds before any monitors show changes. Sometimes he whines, sometimes he paces, but he always places himself between the door and Wren before an episode." Sarah from the shelter arrived next, slightly out of breath, clutching a thick folder against her chest, as if it contained precious treasure. Her hair was hastily pulled back, suggesting she'd rushed over immediately. "I brought Bear's records from his time with us," she said breathlessly, "including 3 documented cases where he alerted us to seriously ill animals before we noticed symptoms. One was a kitten with pneumonia, another a puppy with parvo, and an elderly dog with a heart condition. Dr. Chen's professional skepticism began to crack as they laid out the evidence. She spread the papers across the small table in the corner of the room, comparing notes and times. "These timestamps," she muttered, comparing Thomas's notes to Wren's medical charts, her finger tracing the patterns. "The correlation is remarkable, almost statistically impossible to be coincidental." "We need more tests," Marlowe pressed, leaning forward, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles had gone white. "Something's wrong with my baby, and Bear knows it. Please help us figure out what it is before—" Her voice cracked. "Before my mother-in-law uses this against me." Bear's head suddenly lifted, ears perked forward, his attention laser-focused on Wren. His muscles tensed visibly under his golden-brown coat. Everyone froze, watching the dog with newfound respect. "Pulse ox dropping," Thomas announced moments later, as the monitor began to beep softly. "Respiratory rate increasing, blood pressure's rising too, just like before." Dr. Chen moved quickly, examining Wren with new urgency. Her stethoscope moved across the little girl's chest as she listened intently, her experienced eyes flicking between the child and the monitors. "Order a complete metabolic panel, blood gases, and cardiac workup," she instructed. "And I want continuous monitoring of her autonomic responses. Full EEG too. Something's triggering these episodes." "What are you thinking?" Marlowe asked, heart racing painfully against her ribs as she clutched Bear's collar for support. "I'm not sure yet," Dr. Chen admitted, her honesty refreshing after days of dismissive certainty from other doctors. "But your dog's ability to predict these episodes suggests they're following a pattern we're missing. The regularity indicates a systemic issue, not just random crashes. We need more data, and we need to look beyond the obvious." Sarah spoke up. "I can bring documentation of other cases where dogs have demonstrated medical detection abilities. There's research backing this up. Studies from universities, peer-reviewed journals. Bear isn't the first dog to do this, just the first one in this hospital." "Do it," Dr. Chen nodded decisively. "The more evidence we have, the better our chances of convincing the administration to take this seriously." She paused, looking troubled, her voice dropping slightly. "I heard Evelyn Caldwell is involved. That changes the political landscape considerably." "She's trying to take Wren away," Marlowe confirmed, voice tight with controlled fear. "Says I'm an unfit mother who can't recognize that my emotional support animal is interfering with proper medical care. Then we need to move quickly," Dr. Chen said, her jaw set with determination. "Get me that research. I'll start the additional testing now. And Nurse Aguilar?" "Yes, doctor?" Thomas straightened, his professional demeanor firmly in place. "Keep documenting everything, every alert, every change in vitals, every intervention. Video if possible. We need an ironclad case. The Caldwell name carries weight in this hospital. We'll need irrefutable evidence." For the first time since arriving at the hospital, Marlowe felt a spark of hope flare into something stronger. The isolation that had been suffocating her began to lift. She wasn't alone anymore. Bear pressed against her leg, his warm, solid presence a reminder of why she couldn't give up. His loyalty had never wavered. Now others were beginning to stand with them too. "Thank you," she whispered to all of them, her voice thick with emotion. "For believing us, for believing him." "Sometimes the best medicine comes from listening to what the evidence tells us," Dr. Chen said, gathering her notes with practiced efficiency, "even when it doesn't fit our usual expectations or conventional wisdom." She turned to leave, then paused, her expression softening slightly. "And Marlowe? Don't let anyone remove that dog. He's as much a part of Wren's medical care now as any of our equipment. I'll note that in her chart myself." As Dr. Chen reviewed the latest test results, Bear suddenly became agitated, pacing between Ren's bed and the door. His behavior was different this time, more urgent, almost frantic. The golden brown dog's muscular body was tense, his expressive eyes darting between the hospital room's occupants with an intensity that seemed almost human. "Something's wrong," Marlowe said, watching Bear closely. "But it's not like his usual alerts." She leaned forward in her chair, her wiry frame taut with anxiety, dark auburn hair falling across her face as she studied her dog's movements. The exhaustion etched into her features couldn't mask the alertness in her eyes. Thomas noticed an odd smell in the room, wrinkling his nose slightly as he moved closer to Ren's bed. "Does anyone else detect something chemical? It's faint, but definitely there." His warm brown eyes narrowed as he glanced around the sterile hospital room, methodically trying to identify the source. Bear sneezed repeatedly, pawing at his nose with growing distress. His large paws scraped against the linoleum floor as he circled back to Ren's bedside. Dr. Chen quickly checked Ren's vitals, her fingers moving efficiently across the equipment, but they remained stable, the monitors beeping with reassuring regularity. "We should take samples," Dr. Chen decided, her professional demeanor not quite hiding her concern. "Whatever's triggering Bear might be what we're missing in our medical workup. Animals can detect things our equipment sometimes misses." Thomas retrieved sterile swabs from the supply cabinet, the packaging crinkling. In the quiet room, Marlowe knelt beside Bear, trying to calm him with gentle strokes along his back. The dog's fur felt slightly sticky near his muzzle where he'd been sniffing around Ren's bed, and Marlowe's fingers came away with an oily residue. "Start with Bear," Dr. Chen directed, pulling on a fresh pair of latex gloves. "Whatever he's reacting to might be on his fur. His behavior changed after he investigated under the bed." They carefully swabbed Bear's muzzle and paws, the dog remaining unnaturally still, as if understanding the importance of their task. Dr. Chen also took fresh blood samples from Ren, the needle sliding into the child's arm with practiced precision, and air quality readings from around the room, paying special attention to the areas where Bear had shown the most distress. "I'll rush these to the lab myself," she said, looking troubled as she labeled the samples. "Something about this doesn't feel right. The timing of these episodes is too consistent to be random." While they waited for results, hospital administration sent down forms questioning Bear's presence. The official letterhead and cold bureaucratic language seemed almost threatening. Marlowe refused to sign them, her hands shaking with exhaustion and worry, crumpling the edge of the paper. "They can't remove him," Thomas reassured her, standing protectively at her side. "Dr. Chen classified him as medically necessary. They're just following protocol, but we have precedent on our side." His steady voice calmed her slightly, his presence a bulwark against the institutional pressure. 2 hours later, Dr. Chen returned, her face grim. She closed the door carefully behind her, checking that it had latched properly before speaking. "We found something concerning," she said in a lowered voice. "The lab detected traces of a synthetic aromatic compound, both in Ren's blood work and on Bear's fur." "What kind of compound?" Marlowe asked, her throat tight, fingers digging into the armrests of her chair. The room suddenly felt smaller, the air heavier with implication. "It's a chemical typically used in certain cleaning products, but at much lower concentrations," Dr. Chen explained, spreading out the lab results on the rollaway table. "The levels we're seeing are unusually high, dangerously so. In fact, they're consistent with the symptoms Ren has been experiencing." "Could it be from hospital cleaning supplies?" Thomas asked, leaning forward to examine the papers, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Maybe a new protocol or change in vendors?" Dr. Chen shook her head decisively. "We don't use anything containing this particular compound. I checked our supply manifests personally." And the concentration patterns suggest repeated exposure, not environmental contact. The chemical appears to have been introduced regularly, with peaks corresponding to Wren's worst episodes. Marlowe felt the room spin slightly, gripping the edge of Wren's bed to steady herself. The implication crashed over her like a wave. "Are you saying someone's doing this deliberately?" Her voice came out as barely more than a whisper, the horror of the possibility almost too much to voice aloud. "We need to be very careful about making accusations," Dr. Chen warned, glancing toward the door. "But yes, these findings are concerning enough that I've contacted the hospital's risk management team. This pattern is consistent with what we sometimes see in cases of medical abuse." Bear growled softly, a deep rumble emanating from his chest as he positioned himself between Wren's bed and the door, his powerful body forming a living barrier. His instinctive protection of the child seemed to confirm their worst fears. "Who has had access to Wren's room?" Thomas asked, pulling out his notebook and flipping to a clean page, his nurse's training kicking in with methodical precision. "We need to document everyone." "Too many people," Marlowe replied, her voice shaking as she ran her fingers through her dark auburn hair. "Nurses, doctors, cleaning staff, visitors. My in-laws were here yesterday, and a volunteer reading to the children the day before." Her eyes widened with each remembered encounter, the list of potential suspects growing alarmingly long. "We'll need to restrict access immediately," Dr. Chen said, her decision firm and immediate. "And document everything. Every person who enters, every substance that comes near Wren. I want 24-hour observation logs and security protocols in place." "The hospital administration won't like this," Thomas warned, his experience with institutional bureaucracy evident in his tone. "They're already pushing back about Bear, and an investigation like this will raise flags about liability." "They'll like a lawsuit even less," Dr. Chen replied firmly, squaring her shoulders. "This is now a potential case of patient endangerment. If they resist, I'm prepared to escalate to the medical board and child protective services." Marlowe sank into the chair beside Wren's bed, her petite frame seeming to collapse inward as the weight of the situation settled on her shoulders. Her mind raced through possibilities, each more disturbing than the last. "My mother-in-law, she has connections here. Could she?" She couldn't finish the thought, the betrayal too painful to articulate fully. "We can't jump to conclusions," Dr. Chen cautioned, placing a steadying hand on Marlowe's shoulder. "But we'll investigate every possibility. For now, we focus on protecting Wren and gathering evidence. I'll have the samples tested for fingerprints and see if we can trace the source." "I'll start reviewing security footage," Thomas offered, his loyalty evident in his immediate commitment. "And check the logs of who's accessed this room. There might be a pattern we've missed." His methodical approach offered a practical channel for their shared anxiety. Bear's ears perked up suddenly, his entire body going rigid with attention, and he moved closer to Wren's bed with renewed vigilance. Everyone tensed, watching the monitors for any change, the machine's soft beeping suddenly the most important sound in the world. "Oxygen saturation dropping slightly," Thomas noted, watching the numbers fluctuate. "But not as severely as before. 94% and holding." "The restricted access must be helping," Dr. Chen observed, making notes in the chart. "But we're not out of danger yet. Whatever's causing this is still in her system, even if we've limited new exposure." Marlowe stroked Bear's head, her fingers threading through his golden-brown fur, grateful for his unwavering vigilance. His warmth under her hand was the only solid thing in a world suddenly turned uncertain. "He's been trying to tell us all along. We just had to learn how to listen." The dog leaned into her touch, his eyes never leaving Wren's still form, a silent sentinel against the unseen threat that lurked in the hospital corridors. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across the hospital conference room as Marlowe faced a wall of suits and stern expressions. Evelyn sat at the opposite end of the long table, her silver blonde hair perfectly coiffed, a subtle smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Mrs. Quinn," the hospital's lead attorney began, shuffling through a stack of papers. "We've received an emergency petition for temporary guardianship of Wren Caldwell Quinn, filed by her grandmother, Mrs. Evelyn Caldwell." Marlowe's hands trembled beneath the table. "Her name is just Quinn, and I'm her mother, her only legal guardian. The petition cites concerns about the child's deteriorating condition under your care," the attorney continued, "and questions the unusual treatment protocols you've insisted upon." "You mean Bear?" Marlowe's voice cracked. "The dog who's been keeping my daughter alive?" Evelyn's voice cut through the room like ice. "A dog is not medical equipment, dear, and your emotional attachment to this animal is precisely what concerns me." Thomas, sitting beside Marlowe, spoke up. "Bear's presence has been documented as medically beneficial. We have evidence." "Anecdotal evidence," interrupted another lawyer, "from a handful of sympathetic staff members." The meeting dragged on as Evelyn's legal team presented their case. They had documentation of every refused treatment, every argument with hospital staff, every time Marlowe had questioned medical authority. They painted a picture of an unstable mother putting her faith in a dog rather than modern medicine. "We've also become aware of concerning chemical exposure," Evelyn said, her voice dripping with concern. "How can we be certain these substances aren't coming from this untrained animal?" Marlowe shot to her feet. "That's ridiculous. The lab results—" "Mrs. Quinn, please remain seated," the hospital attorney warned. Dr. Chen, who had been quietly observing, finally spoke. "The chemical compounds we detected are not consistent with any animal-related exposure." "But you can't definitively rule it out," Evelyn's lawyer countered. The hospital's risk management director cleared his throat. "Given the complexity of this situation and the serious nature of these concerns, we believe it would be prudent to temporarily grant Mrs. Caldwell's petition while a full investigation is conducted." The room spun around Marlowe. "You can't do this," she whispered. "It's only temporary," the director assured her, not meeting her eyes. 72 hours to allow for a thorough review of the situation. 72 hours without Bear. She could die." Marlowe's voice rose with panic. "Mrs. Quinn," Evelyn said softly, "I know you believe that, but we need to trust the medical professionals." Thomas placed a steadying hand on Marlowe's arm. "This isn't over," he murmured. "We'll fight it." The hospital attorney slid papers across the table. "We'll need you to sign these, acknowledging the temporary change in guardianship and agreeing to limited visitation during the review period." Marlowe stared at the documents, her vision blurring with tears. "And if I refuse?" "Then we'll be forced to seek an emergency court order," Evelyn's lawyer replied, "which could result in even more restricted access to your daughter." Dr. Chen spoke up again. "Could we compromise? Allow the dog to remain under supervision, given the documented correlation between his alerts and the patient's episodes?" "Absolutely not," Evelyn snapped, her mask of concern slipping for a moment. "I won't have that animal anywhere near my granddaughter." The hospital's risk management director nodded in agreement. "The liability issues are too complex. We'll have additional security protocols in place to monitor the patient closely." Marlowe's hand shook as she picked up the pen. Each signature felt like a betrayal, but she couldn't risk losing access to Wren completely. She had to stay close, had to protect her somehow. When it was done, Evelyn stood gracefully. "I'll have my private nurse begin immediately, and I trust you'll handle the removal of the dog?" The risk management director nodded. Security will escort Mrs. Quinn to collect her animal within the hour. Marlowe sat frozen as the room emptied, leaving only her closest allies behind. Dr. Chen squeezed her shoulder gently. We'll document everything, every single minute, and we'll be watching. I can't leave her, Marlowe whispered. I can't. You're not leaving her, Thomas insisted. We're regrouping. We'll find a way to prove what's really happening. But as security arrived to escort her to Wren's room, Marlowe felt the weight of her defeat crushing her chest. She had fought so hard to protect her daughter, only to be overwhelmed by the machinery of wealth and influence. Bear seemed to understand, pressing close to her side as they walked down the corridor one last time. Thomas hunched over his laptop in the hospital's break room, his cold coffee forgotten beside him. Marlowe paced behind him, her eyes red-rimmed from crying but alert with determination. The security footage from the hospital's west entrance played silently on the screen. There, Marlowe pointed. That's her coming in yesterday morning. They watched as Evelyn Caldwell strode through the automatic doors, her designer handbag swinging from her arm. But something caught Thomas's attention. Wait, go back about 20 minutes. He rewound the footage. The same elegant figure appeared, this time exiting the hospital. She came in twice? Marlowe leaned closer. Look at her bag. Thomas froze the frame. In the earlier footage, Evelyn's bag appeared fuller, more structured. In the later entrance, it hung differently against her side. Dr. Chen, who had been reviewing charts at a nearby table, joined them. Can you access any other camera angles? Thomas nodded, his fingers flying over the keyboard. The parking structure has its own system. He pulled up a new feed, scanning through the timestamp range. The footage showed Evelyn's luxury car pulling into a space. They watched as she emerged, walked to her trunk, and retrieved a shopping bag from an upscale department store. She disappeared from view for several minutes before returning without the bag, adjusting her now lighter purse. What was in that shopping bag? Marlowe whispered. Dr. Chen straightened. Let me make a call. She stepped away, phone pressed to her ear, speaking in rapid, hushed tones. Thomas continued searching through feeds until he found another angle. This one showed Evelyn ducking into a family restroom near the pediatric ward, the department store bag in hand. Receipt lookup, Marlowe said suddenly. The store. Can we find out what she bought? Dr. Chen returned, a determined set to her jaw. Better. My sister works at Nordstrom's fragrance counter. Evelyn Caldwell made a purchase yesterday morning right before coming here. Marlowe's hands began to shake. What did she buy? A bottle of Pure Grace perfume. It's their signature scent. Dr. Chen met Marlowe's eyes. The main component is a synthetic white musk compound. The same compound they'd found traces of on Bear's fur. The same chemical signature that appeared in Wren's blood work during her worst episodes. She's been... Marlowe couldn't finish the sentence. Her legs gave out, and she sank into a chair. Deliberately exposing Wren to trigger reactions, Thomas completed grimly. Probably applying it to blankets or clothing when no one was watching. But why? Marlowe's voice broke. She's her grandmother. How could she? Control, Dr. Chen said quietly. If Wren stays sick, she has leverage to fight for custody, to prove you're an unfit mother. Each episode builds her case. Thomas was already pulling up more footage, documenting every instance of Evelyn entering and leaving the hospital over the past week. A pattern emerged. Brief visits to that same family restroom, followed by appearances in Wren's room with fresh blankets or gifts. We need to test everything in Wren's room, Dr. Chen said, and we need to document this properly. Hospital security, police, child services, everyone needs to see this evidence. Marlo stood, steel entering her spine. She hurt my baby. She deliberately... Her fists clenched. All this time, watching me beg for help, watching the doctors dismiss me, and she was causing it. We've got her, Thomas assured her. This isn't just negligence or a custody battle anymore. This is intentional harm to a child. Dr. Chen was already making more calls, her voice sharp with authority as she coordinated with hospital administration and security. Marlo watched the footage loop again. Evelyn's perfectly composed face, her calculated movements, the casual way she brought poison to her own granddaughter's bedside. The pieces clicked into horrible clarity. Every dismissed symptom, every skeptical doctor, every legal maneuver had been orchestrated to paint Marlo as unstable and paranoid. Bear knew, she whispered. He could smell it on her. That's why he always got between Evelyn and Wren's crib. A security officer appeared in the break room doorway. Dr. Chen, the lab team is ready, and we've contacted the police. They're sending someone from Special Victims. Marlo straightened her shoulders, grief hardening into resolve. Let's get my daughter back. The hospital conference room hummed with purposeful energy as Marlo spread documents across the table. Dr. Chen had commandeered the space, transforming it into a makeshift war room. Test results, surveillance photos, and timeline charts covered every surface. The lab confirmed it, Thomas said, pointing to a highlighted section of the report. The perfume compounds match exactly what we found in Wren's system. And look at the concentration levels. They spike right after each of Evelyn's visits. Dr. Marcus, the skeptical pulmonologist who had initially dismissed Marlo's concerns, now stood firmly with them. These readings are dangerous for an infant. The exposure was deliberate and calculated. He shook his head, genuine regret in his eyes. I'm sorry I didn't listen sooner, Marlo. Sarah Johnston, the shelter worker who had originally paired Bear with Marlo, spread out her own documentation. I've got statements from 3 different veterinary behaviorists. They've reviewed the footage of Bear's protective responses. All confirm this goes way beyond normal canine behavior. He was actively detecting and responding to a threat. Marlo touched Bear's head, where he sat pressed against her leg. His presence anchored her, keeping her focused through the storm of emotions threatening to overwhelm her. The police have copies of everything, Detective Rivera said from her position by the whiteboard. We're building a solid case for criminal charges, but first, we need to get that emergency custody order overturned. Lisa Chen, Dr. Chen's sister who worked at Nordstrom, raised her hand. I've got signed statements from 3 employees who witnessed Evelyn's purchases. She bought multiple bottles over several weeks, always paid cash, always seemed nervous. Marlo studied the timeline they'd constructed. She started small, just enough to make Wren fussy at first. Then she increased the exposure, making each episode worse than the last. Her voice caught. She was testing how much it would take. The court needs to see this pattern, Thomas said firmly. This wasn't just about custody. This was methodical harm to an infant. Dr. Chen nodded. I've contacted Dr. Warner at Children's Hospital. She's the regional expert on environmental toxins in pediatric cases. She's reviewing everything and will testify if needed. What about the hospital's legal team? Marlo asked quietly. She remembered their quick capitulation to Evelyn's demands. They're scrambling, Detective Rivera said with grim satisfaction. Once we showed them the evidence, they realized how liable they'd be if they kept supporting Evelyn. They've withdrawn their backing of her custody petition. Sarah laid out more photos. Bear positioning himself between Wren and various threats. Bear alerting to contaminated blankets. Bear guarding the crib. The documentation of his behavior is crucial. It proves this wasn't just random episodes or your imagination. He was responding to real danger. Marlo touched each piece of evidence, each fragment of truth they'd uncovered. We need to move fast. The longer Wren stays in Evelyn's custody. The emergency hearing is tomorrow morning, Detective Rivera assured her. Judge Martinez has already reviewed the preliminary evidence. She's taking this very seriously. Dr. Marcus gathered the medical reports into clear, chronological order. I'll testify about the progression of symptoms and how they correlate with Evelyn's visits. The timeline is damning. And I've got the security footage compiled and enhanced, Thomas added. You can clearly see her switching out items in Wren's room, always when she thought no one was watching. Marlo looked around the room at these people who had become her defenders, her army. From doubters to champions, from strangers to allies, they had all come together to protect one tiny baby from calculated harm. Tomorrow then, she said, steel in her voice, we show the judge exactly who Evelyn Caldwell really is. The team continued organizing their evidence, each person knowing their role in the coming battle. Bear stayed pressed against Marlo's leg, his vigilance unwavering. Tomorrow would bring confrontation and truth, justice and reunion. But tonight was for preparation, for strengthening their arsenal of facts against Evelyn's wall of lies. The courthouse buzzed with tension as Marlo walked through the security checkpoint, Bear padding faithfully by her side. A special dispensation had allowed his presence, given his critical role in the case. News cameras flashed from the permitted areas, capturing their entrance. Judge Martinez's courtroom felt cavernous, its wood paneling and high ceilings designed to humble those who entered. Evelyn sat at the defendant's table, her silver blonde hair perfectly coiffed, wearing an outfit that probably cost more than Marlo's monthly rent. But today, Marlo noticed something different. Tiny cracks in her grandmother's usually impenetrable facade. Your Honor, Marlo's attorney began, we have evidence of deliberate, systematic poisoning of an infant. Ms. Caldwell used her visiting privileges to expose her granddaughter to harmful substances, creating a manufactured medical crisis to gain custody. Dr. Marcus took the stand first, his testimony clear and damning. The chemical analysis shows increasing concentrations of synthetic aromatics in the baby's system, correlating exactly with Ms. Caldwell's visits. He pointed to projected graphs, the pattern unmistakable. The security footage played next. The courtroom watched in silence as Evelyn repeatedly switched blankets, sprayed items, and placed contaminated toys in Wren's crib. Bear's reactions in each clip were striking, positioning himself between the baby and the tainted objects, attempting to pull them away. The dog's behavior was consistent with trained detection responses, Sarah Johnston testified. But Bear had no such training. He was acting on pure protective instinct, identifying a genuine threat to the infant. Evelyn's attorney tried to paint it as circumstantial, but the evidence kept mounting. Store employees identified Evelyn's suspicious purchases. Laboratory reports confirmed the exact chemical compounds. Hospital staff testified about Bear's accurate warnings before each medical episode. When Detective Rivera presented the timeline of events, showing the escalating pattern of exposure, Judge Martinez leaned forward intently. This appears to be a calculated campaign of harm against an infant. Ms. Caldwell, do you have any explanation for these actions? Evelyn's composed exterior finally cracked. I was protecting my granddaughter from an unfit mother. Someone had to ensure she was raised properly, with advantages. By poisoning her? Judge Martinez's voice cut through the courtroom like ice. By deliberately causing a 3-month-old baby respiratory distress? The gallery murmured in shock as Evelyn's true nature revealed itself. Her mask of concerned grandmother slipped completely, showing the calculating manipulation beneath. This court finds clear and convincing evidence of deliberate endangerment, Judge Martinez declared. The emergency custody order is hereby dissolved. Full custody is restored to Marlo Quinn, effective immediately. She turned her stern gaze to Evelyn. Ms. Caldwell, you are ordered to have no contact with the child. Detective Rivera, please proceed with any criminal charges deemed appropriate. Marlowe's hands shook as she gripped Bear's fur. Tears of relief streamed down her face as her attorney whispered, "We did it. You can pick up Wren within the hour." Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered around Marlowe and her team. "How did you know your baby was in danger?" one asked. Marlowe knelt beside Bear, wrapping her arms around his thick neck. "I didn't know. He did. Bear protected Wren when everyone else doubted. He's the real hero." The story spread quickly. The devoted mother, the heroic shelter dog, the wealthy grandmother's shocking betrayal. Support poured in from around the country, with animal rescue organizations and child advocacy groups championing their cause. Hours later, Marlowe held Wren close in the safety of their home, Bear maintaining his faithful watch nearby. The baby's breathing was clear and strong for the first time in weeks. Despite the exhaustion of the day, Marlowe felt lighter than she had in months. They had won this battle through preparation, persistence, and the unshakable bonds of true family. The victory's sweetness lasted less than 24 hours. Marlowe arrived at the hospital for Wren's follow-up appointment to find 2 animal control officers in the lobby. Their faces were apologetic but firm as they approached, clipboard in hand. "Ms. Quinn, we have orders to quarantine your dog," the female officer said, showing her the paperwork. "There's been a complaint about aggressive behavior and concerns about hospital safety protocols." Marlowe's stomach dropped as she saw Evelyn's attorney's signature on the documents. Bear pressed closer to her leg, his brown eyes watching the officers warily. "This is ridiculous. Bear's never shown aggression. He's the reason my daughter is alive." Marlowe's voice cracked as she pulled out her phone to call her lawyer. But the quarantine order was ironclad, filed through multiple agencies with emergency provisions. As the officers approached with a control pole, Bear whimpered softly. "I'm so sorry, boy," Marlowe whispered, kneeling to hug him one last time. "We'll fight this. I promise." Her tears dampened his golden-brown fur as the officers gently led him away. Upstairs in the pediatric ward, things got worse. Evelyn stood at the nurse's station, immaculately dressed in pale blue silk, speaking quietly with the hospital administrator. "Ah, Marlowe." Evelyn's smile was razor-sharp. "Given recent events, the hospital has graciously agreed to supervise all your visits with Wren. For everyone's safety, of course." The administrator nodded stiffly, not meeting Marlowe's eyes. "We've assigned a security detail and nursing staff to monitor all interactions." "This is insane," Marlowe protested. "The court gave me full custody." "And you still have it." Evelyn's voice dripped false concern. "We're simply ensuring proper medical oversight, given your emotional state after the trial." Marlowe watched helplessly as 2 security guards positioned themselves outside Wren's room. Inside, her daughter slept peacefully, monitored by a nurse who clearly answered to hospital administration. Over the next 3 days, Marlowe noticed subtle changes. New blankets appeared, despite her protests. The room's ventilation seemed different. Most worrying, Wren's breathing grew slightly labored again. "Something's wrong," Marlowe insisted to Dr. Marcus, who had supported her in court. "She's showing the same early symptoms." But without Bear's confirming behavior, her concerns were dismissed as paranoia. Even Dr. Marcus seemed uncertain, trapped between his instincts and hospital politics. Through the glass window, Marlowe watched Evelyn enter Wren's room during approved visiting hours, carrying a small designer baby bag. The security guards nodded respectfully, completely missing how she subtly adjusted the air vent above the crib. Marlowe's heart pounded as she noticed Wren's increasing distress. Her daughter's tiny chest worked harder with each breath, but when she tried to enter the room, the guards blocked her path. Hospital protocol requires scheduled visits only, one stated firmly. That's my baby. Marlowe's voice rose desperately. She's in danger. Miss Quinn, please don't make us remove you from the floor, the other guard warned. Through the window, Evelyn smiled and waved, the picture of grandmotherly concern as she positioned herself between Marlowe and the crib. Without Bear's protective presence, without his early warnings, Marlowe felt utterly powerless. She slumped against the wall, tears streaming down her face. The legal victory meant nothing if Evelyn could still manipulate the system, still find ways to harm Wren. The absence of Bear's steady warmth and vigilant watch left a physical ache in her chest. Somewhere in the city, in a sterile kennel, her loyal protector sat confined while Evelyn orchestrated her revenge. Marlowe had never felt more alone, more desperate, as she watched her daughter struggle to breathe through the glass barrier she couldn't cross. I won't let her win, Marlowe whispered fiercely, pulling out her phone to text Thomas. They needed a new strategy, fast. But as she looked up again, Wren's tiny hands had started to tremble, the first sign of an impending episode. Evelyn's perfectly painted lips curved in satisfaction as she adjusted Wren's blanket one final time before departing, leaving Marlowe to watch in mounting horror as her daughter's condition rapidly deteriorated. Marlowe paced in Thomas's small office in the ER basement, her hands shaking as she held her coffee. The windowless room felt like the only safe place left in the hospital. We need something they can't ignore, she said, running her fingers through her unwashed hair. Something even Evelyn's lawyers can't explain away. Thomas leaned against his desk, his scrubs wrinkled from a double shift. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, but his gaze remained sharp and focused. The chemical tests from Bear's fur were solid evidence last time. We need that kind of proof again. But how? Marlowe's voice cracked. They've got guards watching my every move. I can't even touch Wren's blankets without supervision. Thomas pulled out his phone, scrolling through hospital protocols. Look at this. Every pediatric room has environmental monitoring. Air quality, temperature, everything gets logged. Can you access those records? Not directly, he admitted. But Dr. Marcus can. And he's still on our side, even if he has to be careful about showing it. Marlowe set down her coffee, hope flickering in her chest for the first time in days. If we could prove the air quality changed when Evelyn visits. Exactly. Thomas stepped closer, his voice dropping. And I've got friends in maintenance. They can tell us exactly when those vents were adjusted. We need Bear back too, Marlowe said firmly. His reaction to the chemicals was what made everyone take this seriously in the first place. Thomas nodded, pulling up another document. I called in a favor with a vet friend. She's reviewing the quarantine order. Says there might be a procedural error we can challenge. They worked through the night, spreading papers across Thomas's desk, building their case piece by piece. Security camera footage, staff witness statements, maintenance logs. Each element alone meant little, but together they formed a pattern even hospital administration couldn't ignore. Around 3 a.m, Marlowe's exhaustion finally caught up with her. She slumped in her chair, tears threatening. What if it's not enough? What if she hurts Wren again before we can stop her? Thomas knelt beside her chair, taking her trembling hands in his. Hey, look at me. We're not alone in this fight anymore. We've got allies, good people who see through Evelyn's act. His warmth and steadiness helped anchor her. Marlowe squeezed his hands, drawing strength from his unwavering support. I just keep seeing Wren struggling to breathe and I can't reach her. That's not going to happen again, Thomas said firmly. We're going to get Bear back tomorrow. Dr. Marcus is pulling those environmental reports, and I've got 3 nurses ready to testify about changes they've noticed during Evelyn's visits. Marlowe looked at their joined hands, then up at his determined face. "Why are you risking so much to help us? Your job, your reputation." "Because it's right," he said simply. "And because—" He hesitated, then continued softly, "because I care about what happens to both of you." The air between them shifted, charged with unspoken feelings. But now wasn't the time to explore them. They had work to do. They spent another hour organizing their evidence and preparing their strategy. Everything had to be perfectly documented, impossible to dismiss. One mistake, one loose thread, and Evelyn's lawyers would unravel it all. "Remember," Thomas said as they finally prepared to leave, "we just need to hold on until the hearing tomorrow afternoon. Once we present this to the judge." Marlowe nodded, gathering her strength. One more day of watching through windows. One more day of trusting others to protect her daughter. One more day until they could expose Evelyn's true nature to the world. As they stepped into the dim hospital corridor, Thomas touched her shoulder gently. "Try to rest. I'll keep an eye on things up there." Marlowe managed a small smile, grateful beyond words for his presence in this fight. Together they had built something powerful, not just evidence against Evelyn, but a foundation of trust and determination that could weather any storm. Tomorrow would bring their final confrontation. But tonight, in this quiet moment, Marlowe felt something she hadn't expected. Hope. Bear's nails clicked against the hospital floor as he padded forward, every muscle tense. The security guard held his leash loosely, following Thomas's instructions. Down the hallway, through the double doors, past the nurses' station where friendly faces watched with hopeful expressions. Marlowe's heart pounded as she followed close behind. The quarantine order had been lifted just hours ago, thanks to their veterinary experts' testimony about procedural violations. Now everything hinged on timing. Through the observation window, she could see Evelyn standing over Wren's crib, her back turned. The baby's monitors beeped steadily, for now. Marlowe's hands clenched into fists as she watched her mother-in-law reach into her designer purse. "Now," Thomas whispered, hitting the record button on his phone. The security guard opened the door. Bear surged forward, a low growl rumbling in his chest. Evelyn spun around, a small glass bottle dropping from her hand and shattering on the floor. The sharp scent of artificial flowers filled the air. "Get that animal out of here," Evelyn commanded, but her usual authority cracked with panic. Bear positioned himself between the crib and Evelyn, his protective stance unwavering. Behind them, Wren began to fuss, her breathing growing labored. "Security!" Marlowe called out, her voice strong and clear. "Check her purse, now!" Two hospital security officers stepped in as Thomas quickly moved to check Wren's vital signs. Evelyn clutched her purse closer. "This is absurd. I'm here legally." "Ma'am, please hand over the bag," the first officer said firmly. When Evelyn refused, the second officer gently but firmly took it from her grasp. Inside, they found 3 more bottles of the same fragrance compound that had been making Wren sick. "You're deliberately exposing an infant to known respiratory irritants," Thomas stated, his phone still recording. "We have documentation of every incident." Evelyn's composed facade crumbled. "You can't prove anything. I was simply wearing perfume." "We have the environmental monitoring logs," Marlowe cut in. "Air quality changes every time you visit. We have security footage of you buying these specific compounds. And now we have you on camera, attempting another exposure." Hospital security held Evelyn's arms as she tried to push past them. "Do you know who I am? I'll have all your jobs for this." "And we have the testimony of multiple medical professionals," Thomas added, "documenting the pattern of respiratory distress coinciding with your visits. The police are already on their way." Through it all, Bear remained stationed by Wren's crib, his eyes never leaving Evelyn. The baby's breathing had already begun to ease now that the threat was contained. Within minutes, police officers arrived to take custody of Evelyn. As they led her away in handcuffs, her threats and protests echoed down the hallway. Marlowe barely heard them. She was already at Wren's side, gathering her daughter into her arms, while Bear pressed against her legs, his tail wagging slowly. "You did it, sweet boy," she whispered, reaching down to scratch his ears. "You protected her just like always." The next few days passed in a blur of statements and legal proceedings. The evidence was overwhelming. Security footage showed Evelyn deliberately contaminating Wren's blankets and clothing during visits. Hospital records documented the pattern of exposures. Expert testimony confirmed the dangerous nature of the compounds she'd been using. In the end, the judge's ruling was swift and absolute. Marlowe was granted full custody, with a permanent restraining order against Evelyn. Criminal charges would ensure she couldn't harm anyone else's children. Standing on the hospital steps in the warm afternoon sun, Marlowe held Wren close, while Bear sat alertly at her feet. The baby was breathing easily, her color healthy, no sign of the distress that had haunted them for so long. Thomas joined them, carrying Wren's discharge papers. "Ready to go home?" Marlowe looked at him, then down at Bear, then at her peaceful daughter. Her family, unusual and unexpected, but absolutely perfect. "More than ready." Bear stood, gently bumping his head against her leg. His job wasn't finished. It never would be. He would always be their protector, their guardian, their hero. But now he could do it with the knowledge that the greatest threat had been removed, and his family was finally, truly safe. The summer breeze rustled through the park as Marlowe watched Wren taking her first wobbly steps on the grass. At 10 months old, her daughter was thriving, showing no lasting effects from her earlier ordeals. Bear padded alongside the toddling baby, his body curved protectively around her path, ready to cushion any falls. "She's getting more confident every day," Thomas said, settling beside Marlowe on the checkered picnic blanket. His shoulder brushed against hers, a casual touch that still made her heart skip. "Thanks to her guardian angel here?" Marlowe reached out to ruffle Bear's fur as he guided Wren back toward them. The gold medal from the American Humane Society caught the sunlight, gleaming against his collar. The ceremony last week had been surprisingly emotional. Watching Bear receive formal recognition for his life-saving instincts had brought tears to everyone's eyes. Wren plopped down on the blanket, giggling as Bear gently nuzzled her cheek. Her breathing was clear and strong, no hint of the wheezing that had once terrorized their nights. The latest medical checks showed her lungs were developing normally, all traces of the chemical exposure finally gone from her system. "The Children's Hospital called again," Thomas mentioned, helping Wren stack plastic blocks. "They want Bear to start visiting the pediatric ward regularly. They think his presence could help calm anxious patients." Marlowe smiled, watching Bear's ears perk up at the mention of his name. From rescue dog to certified hero. Who would have thought? "I would have." Thomas caught her hand, intertwining their fingers. "Just like I knew you were something special that first night in the ER. Your strength, your determination to protect Wren no matter what. It was impossible not to fall for you both." The warmth in his brown eyes made Marlowe's chest tight with emotion. Their relationship had grown naturally in the months since Evelyn's arrest, built on a foundation of trust and shared purpose. Thomas had been there through the court proceedings, the late-night feedings, the gradual process of healing. He'd become as essential to their family as Bear himself. "The prosecutor called yesterday," Marlowe said softly. "Evelyn took the plea deal. She'll serve at least 5 years, plus mandatory psychiatric treatment. She can never come near us again." Thomas squeezed her hand. How do you feel about that? Relieved. Sad for what could have been, but mostly just grateful we're all safe now. Marlowe watched as Bear stretched out in the sun, keeping one eye on Wren as the baby crawled over to investigate a dandelion. We've built something better than I ever imagined possible. Speaking of building, Thomas shifted to face her fully. My lease is up next month. I was thinking, my apartment's closer to both the hospital and the better preschools. It has that fenced backyard Bear would love. And there's plenty of room for all of us, if you wanted. Marlowe's heart swelled. She looked at their makeshift family, her precious daughter, their loyal protector, and the man who had stood beside them through everything. Are you asking us to move in with you? I'm asking us to build a home together. Thomas smiled. All of us. Before Marlowe could answer, Wren wobbled to her feet and took 3 determined steps toward them, her first completely unassisted walk. Bear barked once in celebration, tail wagging furiously. Thomas caught the baby as she tumbled into his lap, and Marlowe felt tears of joy spring to her eyes. Yes, she whispered, leaning in to kiss him as Wren clapped and Bear pressed against them both. Yes to everything. Here was the family she'd fought so hard to protect, not bound by blood, but by choice, by loyalty, by love. A daughter who was growing stronger every day, a dog whose devotion had saved them all, a man whose heart was big enough to embrace them completely. Together, they had overcome darkness and found their way to light. Bear settled his head on Marlowe's knee, sighing contentedly. His job as protector wasn't over, but now he could guard their joy as fiercely as he had once guarded against danger. This was what he had sensed all along, the potential for happiness, for wholeness, for love. This was their victory, their peace, their new beginning together.